The God's Wood at Riverrun had always smelled of wet stone and iron leaves, of frogs in the shallows and the faint green breath of the river, but before dawn it also held the smell of smoke. It clung to Robb's hair and cloak as if he had been standing too close to a cook fire. Gray Wind paced the edge of the pool with his hackles high, nose twitching in short, irritated bursts, as if there were a new animal in the wood and he could not decide whether it was worth chasing or fleeing. Robb had sent the guards away. He wanted no one by the heart tree but himself, the wolf, and the face carved in pale wood, whose red eyes stared at the sky with their unending grief. The smoke was not from any fire they had lit. Came from the letter. He turned the parchment over again. The wax seal had been impressed by a ring bearing 3 heads in a whirl of flame, and when he cracked it in the dim hours, a tiny flake of something black and hard had slid onto his palm, warm though the air had turned cold. He had thought it ash. It was not ash. It was a scale curved so fine it might have come from a fish. It left a smudge on his thumb, as if it remembered fire. He had not spoken the letter aloud. He read it and then read it again, the words a tide he could not quite swim against, and then he slipped it into the fold of his jerkin where his heart might warm it and walked out to the Godswood. He could hear the camp beyond the walls slowly waking, the whicker of horses, the grind of a wheel, a smith yawning a curse so long it could have served as a prayer. But he had come here to decide whether what had arrived in the night was madness, sorcery, or the first sane thing that had come to him in months. "Your father never lit a torch in here," Catelyn said behind him, and Robb turned. She had the letter in her hand. He had not heard her come. She found him in every wood. She had always found him, even when he was small and thought himself clever in his hiding. He nodded to the heart tree. "It sees without a torch. It sees without eyes." She stood a moment, reading his face as she had once read his childhood lies. She touched the letter as if it might bite, then looked toward the pool where Gray Wind's reflection rippled and shattered. "I do not like the smell of this." "Nor I." He held out his hand. She gave him the parchment. He did not need to read the words to hear them again. The hand of the letter had been too fine for a sellsword and too steady for a merchant who counted coin by lamplight. The words themselves had been measured and proud, with a hint of music in their ordering, like a speech learned in a language not entirely her own. Robb Stark, king in the north, it began, without the forms of supplication proper to lords of lesser name. The sender did not claim to be lesser. Daenerys of House Targaryen, who signed herself Stormborn, first of her name, offered him her hand in marriage and her strength in war. She asked in return for loyalty and a promise no southern king had asked of a Stark since the conquest, never to set a sword against the north again. She would not demand that he bend the knee. She suggested something else. "Two fires joined are not diminished," the letter said. "We might be one flame with 2 colors." There were other terms, some small and some sharp, written in the voice of a man named Illyrio Mopatis who claimed to speak for her. Ships, a meeting at White Harbor under the eye of Lord Manderley, to be witnessed by men of both lands. Proof that dragons had hatched in the east. Proof lay beside Gray Wind's paw, and the dire wolf kept lifting it with the tip of his nose, then sneezing, indignant. Catelyn frowned at the scale, at the impress on the wax, at the neatness of the words. "Illyrio," she said softly. "I have heard this name, a magister of Pentos who fattens himself on trade. He helped Lord Eddard once, or said he would. He wants to help us now." Robb closed his fingers around the letter and felt how thin the parchment was, how full of trouble. Or himself, always himself. She watched his hand. "You are thinking of war and we are already in one." "I am thinking of ending it," Robb said. "How many nights do you think a dragon is worth? 1,000? 10? If she truly has them. If she is not some mummer's trick. You know better than to think dragons can be counted like coin. I know better than to think Tywin Lannister will shrug and forgive me for beating him once," Robb said, and his voice sharpened on the name. "We have won battles and lost. We have lost what no victory gives back. He waits. He bleeds us where we do not see the wound. He will grow cold and clever, and then he will be terrible. Would you have me be colder and cleverer than Tywin?" Catelyn flinched, and Robb wished he had not said the word terrible. The night he had spoken the Fry words, the night he had watched Arya's little shoes run down small corridors in dreams he could not wake from. The day the ravens had flown black from King's Landing, terrible had been their meat and drink. He hardened his mouth, because he could not soften anything else, and waited for his mother to answer. She stepped closer to the tree, as if she could listen to the face as well as look. "Your father read old tales here," she said finally. "He had no time for songs of dragons. He told me once that Winterfell warmed the north, that it was a hearth for every man who bent the knee to a Stark. He said the old kings measured themselves by how well they kept their people alive through the long nights. There are other kings now. Your father is dead. Your father is dead, and I am sorry to say it so baldly, but this is no tale. We are meat on a board with too many knives." "I know," Robb said, and silence filled the space where he might have said he missed his father while the knives sharpened. "The Freys, the Boltons, the Karstarks. Each of our own knives may cut us. You think to lay a dragon along the board and righten the knives into falling still. I think to let them see the teeth. Maybe it would be enough." Catelyn glanced toward the scale again. "If it is real. If it is real." He tucked the letter away and let out a breath he had been holding since the raven thumped against the shutters with its black beak and blacker eyes. "We have to find out." "Not here," she said sharply. "Not in this wood. Not with old gods listening. We will not speak the name too loudly yet. Not to Edmure. Not to Roose. If they hear dragon in their sleep, they will wake ready to be burned. White Harbor is far. Lord Manderly is as cunning as a fisherman with a harpoon, and he owes us fish. He loves his prosperity and his pies. He will make a feast of rumor if we let him. I will send Meege Mormont north with a letter. If there is a meeting, you need men you can trust," Catelyn said. "Men whose bones grow in the north. Send Lady Meege. Send Galbart Glover. Send a face who knows Pentoshi tricks." Her mouth tightened, and for a moment she looked so tired he wanted to put his cloak around her shoulders as if she were his younger sister and cold. "We should ask the Manderlys to keep the secret for a week. Let our people settle their quarrels before we hand them a new one to pick over." "Fry will hear soon enough," Robb murmured. "He hears everything the rats carry. He will gnaw through any sack we tie. Then tie the sack around his head." The fierceness in her voice startled him. She had been mild in his boyhood, but the war had shown him the iron under the wool. "If you break your promise to him, you will need a dragon simply to step across his bridge. But you did not break it, Robb. You must remember that. You refused a wrong marriage for a true one that may never come to pass. Do not let Walder Frey tell you how to name your own honor." He looked up at the white face in the bark and wondered what the old gods thought of a southern queen with dragons offering to warm a northern heart tree. The leaves stirred. Perhaps it was only the breeze from the river mouth. When the council gathered, the morning had sharpened from gray to blue. News and quarrels arrived with bread and ale. Rickard Karstark came in with grief burning like a coal on his tongue, and all his talk was of Lannister heads. The Great John clapped Robb so hard on the shoulder, he spilled a cup and then bellowed that any man who brought a dragon to a fight was a man after his heart. Roose Bolton's eyes were colorless as wetted ash. He spoke coolly of grain and bridges, of how many men could be fed if the river ran this way or that, of supply and, in a voice so careful it might have been washing itself, of the rumor borne by a raven that had died soon after it gave up its letter. He put a fingertip to the black scale, clicked against the board. He did not pretend not to be curious. He did not show excitement. No one had ever accused Roose Bolton of too much heat. "Proof is a coin counterfeiters trade in," he said. "Let us not be peasants in a market." The Great John snorted. "When a man shows you a pug-faced babe, you do not doubt he sired it," he said, and half the table guffawed into their cups. "When a dragon scale lands on your table, you do not say it's a fish. You do if you've never seen a dragon," Bolton murmured. Catelyn watched them with the same stillness she brought to a nettle. Robb felt the tug to laughter at John Umber's roughness. He did not permit it. He could feel the weight of all of them on his face as if they were each laying a stone there. He spoke with a king's voice, which he was learning meant sometimes speaking like a patient father. "We will not be fools," he said, "nor will we be cowards. I will send north, not to cry the news, but to ask Lord Manderley whether he has seen with his own eyes who sails near his mouth and what breath warms his kitchens at night. I will not sell my crown for a story. I will not lose a war because I was afraid of a story. And if a girl comes with 3 lizards on her shoulders and a handful of cells, words," Ricard Karstark demanded savagely. "What then? Will you give her your oaths as if she were a king? Your father's blood wound into a foreign braid." "She will be a guest," Robb said, and though his heart thudded, he kept his face as bland as the stone stark direwolf that stood over the gate at Winterfell. "A guest under our protection. If she is a fool, we will send her away. If she is a snake, we will kill it. If she is what she claims, then I will judge that too." "You will judge it with your heart and not with your head," Karstark said. "There are men who will pay any price to watch Lannister men scream. I am one of them, but I am not a man to bend my neck to a dragon again. I care nothing for old oaths to old kings. Let the South burn its old kings and eat the ashes." "Your sons were murdered," Catelyn said, and Karstark's head tensed as if on a leash. "We will have justice. We will have it by winter's end if it takes our last breath. We are not speaking of bending. We are speaking of ending the deaths that have already been too many." Karstark's mouth opened, then shut. He folded his hands, a gesture that looked like prayer until one saw how white the knuckles were. Roose watched her as one watches winter geese on a black lake, with a hunter's patience. The council broke with no one satisfied and no one brave enough to say he was. Robb wrote the letters himself to Wyman Manderley, whose girth had not slowed his mind. To Lady Meage Mormont, whose rage, he thought with a flicker of grim humor, would be a shield against the heat of any dragon. To Galbart Glover, to the Tallhearts, to Lady Dustin, and to Howland Reed, who had never answered any raven but whose men appeared out of fog when one needed them most. He sealed each with the direwolf's head. Grey wind nosed them as if to say they tasted of salt. By the time the ravens were loosed, the sky had whitened with thin cloud and the river's skin had gone leaden under the weak sun. By sunset a reply came, swift as if it had been penned before he had written his request. Lord Manderley had sent his own bird. The parchment was greasy. A pastry mark smeared one edge. The words were ornate. The hand as confident as a man who had found wealth sat comfortably on his knees. "My gracious king," it read, as if that were a title Wyman Manderley liked calling him more than he liked wearing his own. A small fleet had been sighted off the Bight, rounded the fingers under Tyroshi sails, and anchored out beyond the outer harbor. Their standards bore 3-headed dragons so often repeated even the children playing on the quays could draw the heads by memory. A slim, dark-haired girl had come ashore with 2 men of import, the first a graying bear of a knight whose tongue betrayed the north even as his courtesy attempted to forget it, and the second a white-bearded fellow who bowed his honor so low it scraped the shell-strewn street. A litter was offered and declined. The girl walked. She had 3. Lord Manderley's words drifted into euphemism for a line and then rallied. They had 3 tight-winged creatures that perched together like sullen, clever crows and stared at the fishmonger's eels with an interest too hot for mercy. The men of White Harbor spat and made signs. The children did not run. The girl called herself Daenerys and requested bread and salt. She had taken it and ate neatly, Manderley wrote, with better table sense than many a petty lord he could name. He had laughed when he wrote that. Robb could hear the laugh in the loops and spurts of the ink. She requested, the letter continued, that she be allowed to send an emissary to the king in the north to ask for a meeting. "She's already in your city, my lord," Robb said aloud to the parchment, and only then realized he was smiling the way a man smiles at a rival sword he intends to test with his own. He wiped the smile from his face before handing the letter to Catelyn. He sent his emissary, Lady Meage, as decided, and Sir Wendell Manderley's brother Jared, a man whose memory could drink a feast and repeat it back to a cook. Each rode with a few of the best riders Robb had, and each had orders to watch, listen, and bow no lower than courtesy demanded. Grey Wind went, too, to smell what he would smell and give Robb a piece of knowledge he could not get with his eyes. He did not like letting the wolf out of his sight. He did it anyway. Men trusted the king who trusted his men and beasts to do their work. The days between dispatch and return stretched long and brittle. Rivers carry rumors as easily as fish, and every cart that came in from the fords brought the same word in a dozen versions. Dragons, dragons, dragon queen. Sells words from the free cities with thin coats and red scarfs around their wrists laughed and prayed in equal portion. Priests of the red god whispered that fire had brought a bride across the sea. An old man with hair cut square to his skull told anyone who would listen that the last time he had seen a dragon, it had been the size of a hunting hound and used to curl itself around a brazier in the ladies' dressing room. No one asked him which lady. He might have told them a myth if pressed. He preferred to be bought an ale for the telling he wished to give. The emissaries returned at dusk, their horses lathered and their eyes full of something they could not put into simple words because simple words tend to burst when towns learn new names. Midge Mormont did not dismount at first. She sat the saddle as if she had seen a mountain move and had decided not to shout about it for fear the other mountains might feel challenged. "She is small," Midge said at last, and her voice begrudged the word only because it was accurate. "She is small and she does not blink when old men talk as if they mean to lift her on a platter and salt her." Jared spoke into her pause. Her courtesies sharp. Her men. "One of them is Sir Jorah Mormont. I knew his father." Robb kept his face straight. Jeor Mormont had given Jon his sword. He thought of Ghost's pink eyes. He thought of the wall. "He will be a bridge. Or a stone in your boot." Midge swung down. She smelled of horse and sea and some tang like oranges. "He looked at me like a man who's been away from home too long and forgot whether the hearth burns hot or cold. He said your name like a prayer. He says the girl is queen." "And the dragons?" Ricard Karstark asked from where he had come like an arrow to a hawk. Midge's mouth did something like a smile. No warmth, only the baring of teeth. "They are real, Lord Karstark," she said, and Karstark flinched as if hit with water. They listen to her voice. They do not yet fill a hall with their wings. They can set fish alight with a breath. "Fish," the great Jon laughed. "We shall never want for cooked suppers." "Did you eat with her?" Catelyn asked. Midge nodded. "Bread and salt." Wyman Manderly fed her as if he were setting crown pieces on a plate. He would feed an army if it would sit at his table and write its thanks in gravy. The girl eats without looking at her plate. She looks at each man in turn until he looks away. When she looks at you, you think of a wind that will blow or will not, and either way you will go with it. "And her message?" Robb asked quietly. Midge fiddled with her glove. She was not a woman to be delicate. That she was choosing her words told Robb more than any flourish. "She will not write again. She will come." He felt the new shape enter the room then, as if a bird had flown in and everyone was pretending not to notice for fear they would have to open a window. "She would come to Riverrun?" Midge lifted her chin toward the door, toward the river, toward the east where the road ran up to the fork and then away into the routes to White Harbor. "Not to Riverrun. To White Harbor first to see what sort of man you send for her and what sort of port you ask her to dock in." But she asked. "No, Pym, she did not ask. She said she would meet you at the Wolf's Den or on the quay, not in Wyman's fancy new hall. She likes old stones. She likes old things that hold their shape. That," Roose murmured, "is a curious thing to like." Robb heard himself say, as if half dreaming, "Send word to Lord Manderly that I will come." "Send word to the Freys that you won't need their bridge?" the great Jon crowed. "I'll ride with you, lad." "We will need their ears not to hear anything," Roose noted. "We will need them deaf for once. That is asking a river not to run." "I will take a tidy party," Robb said, and heard the man he had become make the "we." "Mother, Midge, Galbart, Lord Bolton, a handful of riders, and not a trumpeter among them. I will not carry drums to a parley with dragons." Catelyn's mouth was a line now, but a line that did not tremble. "If you go," she said with quiet clarity, "we must be prepared to hear terms we do not like and say yes to some of them, and prepared to say no." Karstark barked. Robb felt the scale, forgotten in his purse, curve against his wrist. He looked at Karstark. "I am prepared to be king," he said. They rode at dawn. They went with no banners raised, though the men of the road turned to stare as gray wind loped beside the horses, tail high, ears forward, and the wolf's shadow flitted across the oat stubble. The autumn wind smelled of apples rotting sweetly, and old blood turned into iron on the road bend where raiders had been stopped weeks ago and left to hang from a quince tree. Catelyn did not look at the bodies. She had stopped looking. She had stopped not out of callousness, but because she had reached the point in grief when one omits what one cannot repair. She watched the hedges instead, the way the rose hips burned like coals against the fading leaves. Roose Bolton rode with his back so straight he might have had a rod down the spine of his cloak. He kept near Robb but did not fuss, did not tell him how to hold his reins, did not presume. He had counsel he would speak later, and Robb decided he did not want to hear it yet. He preferred to listen to the clop of hooves and gray wind's breath and the distant hiss of the river slipping past the reeds. By noon the road had widened and the smell of salt had begun to drift into the land. Thin at first, then stronger, a white line woven through all the other scents. Catelyn breathed it with a surprise that looked almost like hope. She had never liked ships, but she liked the sea's honesty. Came and went when it meant to, and it told you so. White Harbor rose out of water and stone and smoke, the towers pale as the fat under a carver's knife, the quays busy with gulls, the Manderley merman rippling in paint against the gray sky. The new castle sat like a complacent lord at a feast, his plate always full. The wolf's den next to it looked older and hungrier, a narrow keep with its scars showing. Men shouted over nets littered with herring. A boy in a patched cap broke into a run when he saw gray wind, then stopped so suddenly he nearly fell, and his mouth made the O that men and boys make when their whole world opens wider by 3 breaths. On the quay, Wyman Manderley was a glory of brocade and appetite, his beard netted with crumbs that someone had the courage to keep pulling out while he smiled. He bowed and called Robb my young king in a tone that managed to be both sincere and generous, as if he had baked Robb himself and was proud of the loaf. His son, Wylis, looked leaner and more steel. He greeted Catelyn with a fondness that made her remember eating eels with lemon under kinder banners. "She is waiting near the den," Manderley said, lowering his voice though it was impossible for a man of his size not to be heard. "She said she preferred old stones. I told her my kitchen has a hearth old as sin." She did not laugh. "Does she laugh?" Catelyn asked before she could stop herself. "Only with her eyes, my lady, and even then one must be quick to catch it." The wolf's den's yard was swept clean. Fishing nets had been folded and carried away. The old gallows beam that had once hung over the gate was a rumored thing. Robb had heard that Lord Wyman had it taken down in a fit of civility years ago. In its place, a line of lanterns guided a path to the small inner court whose flagstones were slick with salt. Men stood there, 2 with braids bound in leather and bells, 1 with a white beard that fell like a river over his throat, 2 lean ones with skin dark as chestnut and knives strapped in clever places. But his eyes went past them all. She stood in the shadow of the sea-stained wall, cloak bright against stone, hair silver white and braided with a care that made the braid look like rope until the wind whipped the end and a bell chimed softly. She was small, as Meech had said, smaller than Catelyn, smaller than some boys who ran fish to market, but the smallness was like a blade's, not to diminish its cut. A dark-scaled creature perched on her shoulder and laid its little head against her neck as if for warmth. Another clung to her forearm, and when it turned its snout, Robb saw its eye, the color of a coal pushed deep into ash just before dawn. Sir Jorah Mormont stood a step behind her and looked at Robb as if he were looking through a gate at a yard he had once played in and never thought to see again. The white-bearded man had eyes the gray of a winter sea. He regarded Robb not like a king but like a puzzle piece he had once lost under a chair. She came forward. The dragons tightened their claws in her cloak and hissed very softly. "Robb Stark," she said, and there was the music Meej had tried to name. A lilt not born in Westeros, an iron in the little words. She did not call him king. She did not call him anything but his name. "I am Daenerys." He bowed from the waist as his father had taught him to bow to men who might be friends if one was careful. My lady, her mouth quirked. If that was her laugh, it did not last. She looked at Grey Wind and her eyes warmed a fraction. You bring your shadow with you. He keeps his own counsel, Robb said. As do I. Will you break bread with me? She lifted her hand, and the white-bearded man tilted his head. Bread, he said, as if writing the word in air with his lips, and someone stepped from the side passage cradling a round loaf. Esteemed. The sea air picked up the smell and flung it at them all. Daenerys took the bread, tore it, and offered a piece to Robb. He took it and did not look away from her eyes as he put it in his mouth. Salt followed, in a chipped dish, 3 pinches as if she were counting something only she knew. He took one. She took one. She offered Catelyn the third. Catelyn's fingers shook, little more than a tremor, and only Robb saw it. We are under guest right, Daenerys said, and for a moment she might have been one of the children playing on the quay earlier, the words a lesson she was proud to know. Do your creatures require the same? Roose Bolton's voice was mild. He spoke really to others, but his eyes did not leave the dragons. They eat when they are hungry, she said calmly. Like lords, the great Jon rumbled under his breath. He had not been invited, and yet he was there, as if the wind had carried him in a pocket. She moved her hand, and Robb saw the ring that had pressed the seal. The heads were 3, not like serpents as he had imagined, but like birds of a kind he had never seen carved wholly on stone anywhere in the north, elegant and cruel. The creature on her shoulder flicked a tongue like a shred of blood. Catelyn spoke then, gently. Your Grace, she said, making the bold choice for them, the choice everyone would talk about down every riverbank. You honor us. Daenerys's braid bell chimed as her head tilted. She accepted the title like one accepts a cloak offered against rain. My lady, I have not seen snow. You will, Robb said, and wished almost at once he had not spoken it as a promise, because promises were stones too, and one must carry them until they crushed you or you set them down where you hoped there was ground enough for both. It is not the best thing the North offers a guest. I wish to see it, she said, and the smallness of her smile knitted something in him he had not known was frayed. It was a simple wish. It sounded like truth. They moved into the hall of the den, low and old, where the hearth smoked into the room despite the hood, and a table had been set with fish dressed with lemon and dill, with oatcakes, with wedges of a pale cheese that tore into crumbling, salty slabs, with little pies whose buttery crust flaked apart under a knife. Wyman Manderley had sent enough for twice their number, and a jug of something he called autumn beer that tasted of dried apple and fennel. Robb waited until Daenerys sat. He watched how the dragons settled, how their wings beat once and then stilled, how the one on her forearm charred a shred of fish without scorching her hand. Sir Jorah ate like a man making himself remember good manners. He kept half an eye on Catelyn all the while, and when their glances met, his mouth softened with something half apology, half stubbornness. The white-bearded man, whom Daenerys named as Barristan Selmy, finally, after the last 5th cup had been poured and the last crumb knocked into a mouth, stood and bowed. Your Grace, he said to Daenerys. She looked at Robb. When I write my laws, she said, they will be written near a fire. Here I have questions, and they will be asked here, where men smell of salt and not of rosewater. Ask them, Robb said. He felt the old drowsy peace of Winterfell wrap the back of his neck. Talking by a hearth had always made the world feel manageable. She did not mince words. She did not wrap them in silk. You say you are king in the north. I say I am queen of the 7 kingdoms. The south murdered your father and my brother and my father long before him. Our enemies drink from the same cup and let others wash it. I will not put my mouth to it. I would break it. Will you help me break it? Yes, Robb said. Too quickly, perhaps. The word leapt like a spark. Catelyn's hand tightened under the table on the fabric of her gown. She did not speak. Daenerys nodded once, as if he had passed the first gate, then lifted one hand, palm flat. I do not ask you to bend. I do not ask you to take my signet and wear it in place of yours. I ask that you stand with me as you have stood with your own. And when we have broken the men who burned your father and the men who laughed as my house burned, we will build. I would not see the north starved for southern debts. I would not see its children taken to fatten southern courts. I will write one law for all men that says what was yours is yours and what was mine is mine. And yet we will hold something together between us that is not either one of ours alone. Robb realized then that the argument within him was old, and it was not about pride. He had wanted the North safe for the rest of his people's lives, for children's children, and he had wanted to see the men who had made Sansa cry on a steel blade. He had not known how to ask for both like a thief. The girl asked like a queen who had had to beg once and never meant to again. "What do you call the thing we hold together?" he asked, stalling and seeking at once. "Peace, if we do it properly," Barristan said. "A reckoning first." "Marriage," Daenerys said, plain as an axe. Roose Bolton's lashes did not so much as quiver. The great John coughed ale up his nose and laughed until it took 3 thumps on the back to make him stop. Wylis Manderly sat forward and looked as if he had waited all his life to see someone put a word like that on a table like this. Catelyn's hands folded together as if she were wringing water out of a cloth she cowl. "Do not allow to drip." Robb kept his face empty. It was a trick he had been learning. He did not think of Jane. He did not think the name because he had not taken it into his heart beyond a fever and a war and one long night of wanting the world to stop hurting. He did not think of Sansa because thinking her name would make him say it aloud and break his voice. He thought of Winterfell's heart tree and of the ring of stones around the weirwood where men had once wed without a septon's blessing and the wind had been the witness and the leaves the choir. "Say plainly what you want," he said. Daenerys's chin lifted a fraction. Her bell chimed. "I want your oaths to me as your queen when we go south to break the wheel that has ground both of our houses," she said, and her hand rested on a dragon's back. "I want your promise that the North will not draw a sword against me when the wheel is broken. In return, I give you my oaths to you as your queen when we are in the North. I promise to set no tax upon you for southern wars. I promise to call you king in your own lands, to send men when you call if winter runs hard against your walls, to break your enemies where they come from the sea and from the hills. I will have my throne in the south. You will have your throne in the north. Between them we put a bed and a board, and the children we make on that bed will know that 2 lands can be held by hands that hold each other." The heat in the room shifted then, and Robb had the absurd thought that if he extended his hand toward the hearth, he would draw it back without a blister. But if he held it out toward Daenerys, he would lose the hair on the back of it. He knew it would be a poor joke to make, and so he did not make it. Catelyn found her voice. "You ask us for the most dangerous thing a mother can imagine, your grace," she said, and the grace sat more naturally this time. "You ask us for babies that would be crowns and swords both. We cannot make such babies without making enemies in the doing." Daenerys's eyes did something new then, a flicker like light under ice. "All babies make enemies, my lady. They grow. That is what enemies fear. That is what enemies always fear. Another winter, another boy with a sword. I propose to give yours fire, and not merely steel." "Fairly spoken," Roose Bolton murmured, and Robb felt his stare as one feels a needle glance the skin without yet drawing blood. Sir Jorah's mouth had trembled when she said children. Now he made it firm. "It is a fairer offer than any lord in the south will give," he said to Robb, and his north bled out in the low vowels of the sentence, and his eyes said more. "I am a man from your islands who sold men and shamed himself, and yet I know a good bargain when I see one. What if I say we would marry, but I will not give you my oath as queen?" Robb asked, not because he thought to say it, but because a king must speak a question before it becomes a temptation in some other man's mouth. "Then I would say you do not understand the thing I bring," Daenerys answered evenly. "I do not come to be your pretty southern, nor to be a tame dragon to hang like a jewel over your hall, nor to be a word the phrase used to stab you. I will not come north in winter only to shiver in your bed and bake your children and go back south with my dragons as the songs you sing of me sour with the first snow. If we do not weave this tightly at the beginning, the first gust pulls it loose. I have nothing left that can be pulled loose. I am either your equal or your enemy. A small, soft gasp ran along the table like a mouse. The Greyjohn's grin returned. Bolton did not blink. Wireless Manderley breathed out through his nose as if he had smelled cinnamon. Robb realized then that he liked her voice even when it angered him. He liked it because it treated him not as a boy with a crown that clanked when he walked, but as a man who had set something irreversible into motion. "Then I say yes," he said, and felt how quiet the word was, how the hall leaned toward it. "On this condition, the North will be no king's game board. Not yours, not mine. The first law we write together binds us both to that. When we go south, we go not merely to win but to end the habit that thinks a child's song is a proper roof for a city that cannot afford a roof. We will make men swear what they mean." "Make them how?" Barristan asked, not disrespectful but not gentle either, and Robb heard in the question, "I have watched more oaths than you be taken and broken." "By fire?" the Great John murmured, and Daenerys's dragon looked at him sharply as if the word had been tossed toward its mouth. "By the old gods," Robb said, and felt the white face on the heart tree watching him from leagues away. "And the new, if they must, and by something else. By the sight of your beasts sitting in the rafters of the great hall of King's Landing while we write the laws in their shadow. Men do not spit as easily when something is watching that would eat them for sport." Daenerys looked at him without moving a muscle for a heartbeat, and then she smiled. It was full and clean and without any of the princess trickery that Catelyn disliked in southern courts. It made Robb's hand tighten around the cup he had not realized he still held. "Then we will see you wed," Wyman Manderley said in the silence that had been waiting for someone to fill it. "In a godswood, in a September, in a snowstorm if it would hurry matters, though my pastry cooks would weep to waste their art in such weather. We will show the phrase what it means to make an oath that the gods themselves can hear." Catelyn pressed her lips together. The shape of resignation became the shape of consent, the way the sea wears at a stone until it is round enough to be called a jewel. "We will need a weirwood," she said. "There is one on the hill above the city, near the old walls. It is not so fine as Winterfell's, but its face has eyes that look as if they ache. I've seen inconvenient weddings before." Daenerys touched the dragon on her arm as if calming herself by calming it. "I will not kneel to trees," she said, not mocking, simply a woman marking the edge of her own belief. "You need not," Catelyn said. "One of us will." She looked at Robb. He realized suddenly that his mother had always assumed she would not see his wedding. The kindness of being surprised by life sometimes hurt worse than its cruelty. The next days moved like a tide on a flat beach. Seemingly slow, and then suddenly the water was around your ankles. White Harbor's small godswood was enclosed by low walls white as bones, with little pale flowers stinging the air with sweetness despite the season. The heart tree sat slightly crooked. Its face was less fierce than sorrowful, a carving done by a hand that had not wanted to scare its children. Snow threatened, then thought better of it, then threatened again. The city whispered. Children ran in packs, throwing pebbles to see whether the dragons would catch them. The dragons ignored them. Fisherwives laid their palms on Daenerys's cloak as she walked through the market and whispered words in tongues the North did not know. Men who had never bowed to a southerner tipped their heads when she passed, as if the bell in her hair commanded them with politeness. Robb slept badly. It was not fear. It was the exhilaration that comes before a charge. Gray wind paced, whined, took the steps in 3 leaps up and 3 leaps down, and disturbed the guards until they began to miss their captains. The night before the day, Robb stood on the wall walk, looked out at the sea, and thought of ice. He thought of winter coming not like a song men sang because they liked to hear themselves, but like a wind with teeth. He thought of Jon, of Ghost's eyes, of the wall. If he was tying his life to a dragon, he had better be sure that the dragon did not eat his brother, even inadvertently, even carelessly. He thought of writing to Jon. He thought of sending a raven whose words might never come back. "Your Grace," Sir Jorah said, coming to stand a careful space away. He had sought him out with the politeness of a man who had once known the rhythm of Robb's father's hall and would not presume. "It will be strange weather for her. She wants to see snow." "She will," Jorah said, and the love in his voice was not a lover's love. not in that moment. It was a fierce fatherly love, a man's love for a cause that had become a person. She will see it and think it is a new kind of ash. She will put out her hand to catch it and think it burns. You will have to tell her it does not. Robb looked at him. You are from Bear Island. You left it. I did, Jorah said. Shame and defiance mixed in him like two wines in one cup. And it never left me. That is the thing about the North. I have tried to explain it to her. She humps at me like a cat with a bird's feather in her mouth. And then she tells me about heat that lies on the skin like a coin pressed too long. They stood in silence a moment longer. The sea breathed. Far out, where the gray wore itself into white, a whale rose and rolled and sank. It looked like the back of a god. If you cross her, Jorah said finally, and the knife in his voice was not sheathed. I will kill you. I will try. I do not know if I can, but I will try. You speak that to a king, Robb said without heat. I speak it to a husband, Jorah said. It is my duty. Then it will be mine not to give you cause to prove the strength of your arm, Robb said, and realized that he did not mind the threat as much as he thought he would. It was clean. It was clearer than most of the words that filled his days now. Snow began with the dawn, not heavy but fine and sparse as the little white fish bones he had seen under a girl's fingernails once as she cleaned a catch on a riverbank. He went to the God's Wood. Men already stood in cloaks dark as old moss. Women came with them, not fine ladies but wives of sailors. A few girls with bouquets of wintergreen and the last reluctant violets from a sheltered corner of a yard. Wyman Manderley brought a meat pie as big as a shield and hid it behind a stone and then confessed to hiding it and made everyone laugh. Roose Bolton looked at the tree for so long a crust formed on his cloak from the falling snow, and still his eyes did not blink. Daenerys came last, not for lateness but for effect, Robb suspected, or perhaps that was his vanity speaking. She wore a dress white as the heart tree's bark, heavy enough to show that someone had thought of the cold, and over it a wolf-gray cloak lined in something pale that might have been silk or the inside of a seashell. Her braid had been remade, and jewels like drops of red wine were set at intervals all the way down. The dragons rode her shoulders like living epaulets, and snow did not stay on their dark backs. It melted. Catelyn had arranged what could be arranged. No septon stood beneath the tree. The old gods do not hand you a man in a robe. The God's Wood had itself, and that was enough. But to please Daenerys, to make a bridge that would not collapse under the first cart, a red priest had come to the edge of the wood with a brazier and a whispering voice. He would not step under the branches. He said his god disliked trees. Daenerys had smiled at him in a way that was not kind and said he might stand where he liked and look useful. The carved face in the tree seemed to Robb to tilt as they stood there, just a fraction, a carving's trick of weather and imagined blessing. He stepped forward. I bring a bride, he said to the wood, not to bend your branches down to her will, to shelter her if you will. She brings me fire. Catelyn put a hand against the tree. It had the same skin it had always had, cold and a little damp and unyielding. She whispered something into the red mouth. It was a mother's prayer. No god had ever found a way to refuse those. Without consequence. Daenerys stood still and allowed the snow to kiss her hair. She looked up, and for one moment she seemed any young woman watching weather. Then she looked at Robb and the face changed into the one he had seen when she first offered him the bread. She did not have a septon. He did not have a silver-voiced singer to call out their names and bind them in rhyme. They had a tree and a fire in the brazier and 3 beasts perched in silence and the sound of men breathing. Say what you would have the gods hear, Robb said, and felt how he was asking not only her, but himself and the watchers and the leaves. She spoke first. She did not speak Valyrian. She spoke the language of the North with care, and in that carefulness lay respect that mattered. I will not leave you when the war is colder than the wind, she said. I will not sell your name under the bright banners in exchange for favor. I will keep faith with the things you keep faith with, and I will keep them bright with fire when your people need it. When men say that a queen cannot be wife to a king unless he forgets his own land, I will laugh and teach them a new way to count their duties. He had not expected to be moved. He had expected to be heartened, perhaps, or fortified. He put his hand to the tree, and the wood was wet. "I will keep you safe in my hall," he said, and stopped. Because the promise was too small to fit into his mouth, he started again. "I will not let our bed be a plow for other men's fields," he said. "We will plant only where we intend to eat. I will give you my counsel before my men have it. You will give me yours. I will not take your dragons for toys, nor will I let them be caged by my lords. When the cold comes, I will kill with you, and when the heat comes, I will sweat with you. If the gods choose to give us children, I will teach them their names so they know they have two." The white-bearded knight bowed his head. Sir Jorah looked at his boots. A wind came then, and the leaves moved. Snow shook itself out of the branches like a flock rising, fell around them, thickening. The Red Priest muttered something that sounded like complaint. The brazier snapped and spat. For rings, Wyman Manderly had provided gold in the shape of a merman and a wolf biting each other's tails. But the ring Daenerys slid onto Robb's finger was the one with the 3 heads, which she had worn on a chain and now gave up, letting it settle into his palm like a small live thing that had chosen its new place. He gave her the Stark ring, simple, iron and silver twined, old as the story of who was first, and it looked both wrong and right against her pale hand. The dragons spread their wings together, a practiced thing, and let out breath that steamed, and for a heartbeat Robb imagined he felt the heat on his cheeks. The direwolf's howl followed, long and clear, a line of sound that drew the city's sound up to meet it. Men in the street halted and lifted their faces. Women put their hands to their hearts. They kissed, not like the South kisses in rain of rose petals and cheers, but like people trying to make something hold in wind and cold. Her mouth was cool and then warm. He was aware of the bells in her hair, and of his hand on her spine, and of how someone, not the Red Priest, began to cry quietly in the trees. After, the feasting in the new castle was long and loud. Wyman Manderly had not lied about pies. The tables sagged. Men who had refused to laugh for months found themselves laughing at wine-soaked stories about giant squids and the perils of sleeping with minor nobles' daughters with small knives hidden in their corset lacing. Daenerys did not eat as much as the eldest Manderly daughter would have liked her to, but she did taste everything, and when an old woman brought her a dish of smoked eels to honor the first queen to eat in White Harbor since ever, the girl took little bites of each eel and made a face only once and made sure no one but Robb saw it. He danced with her. He was not a graceful man, and she did not know the steps the North's fiddlers knew, but they found a way. It was a relief to move his feet to the music and not to the thud of marching. He had thought he would be embarrassed by the eyes. He had thought of Jane, and then he stopped thinking of her because there was nothing to do with that thought but walk back into his own shame and stay there. The eyes on him now were hungry and hopeful and afraid and greedy. He danced anyway. When the hall had drained of its first wildness and the third pie had been cut and sent out to hungry hands on the quay, when Wylis had cornered Roose Bolton into a long conversation about salt storage and the Bolton steward had begun to look around for knives to polish that did not need polishing, Robb led Daenerys out into the courtyard to the small garden with its frozen herbs and cracked bucket. Snow lay in the corners like forgotten folded linen. The dragons hovered just above her shoulders as if they were attached by string. He had not thought to be nervous, but a new quiet sat between them, a quiet he did not know how to fill with talk of grain or gates. He found a thing simpler. "You wanted to see snow." He held out his hand to catch some. The flakes landed and melted and wet his palm. She put her hand under his, and the flakes fell on both. "It does not burn," she said, sounding almost disappointed. "It burns if you lie in it all night," he said, "as fire burns if you stand in it." She tipped her head back. The dragons did the same without thinking, and a dozen little flakes landed on the black of their eyes and slid off. "It does not make the night smell like anything," she mused. "In my cities, when the rains come, they smell of spices and gutters and men's work. This smells like nothing. It smells like a room that has not been opened in a long time. It smells like a room waiting." "A room waiting," he repeated, and then decided he liked the phrase because of the way it made him think of a hall that could welcome or swallow and no one yet knew which it would do. She looked at him sidelong. "Your mother does not love me." He almost said the polite thing. He almost said, "You will grow upon her as moss grows on a stone that is not moved." He did not. "She is afraid," he said, honest as a winter. "Of dragons." She glanced at her shoulder with amusement just sharp enough to cut finger skin. "Of a girl she cannot help like she could help her own daughter," he said. "Of me not being careful with my name. Of you being careful with yours in ways that cost us more than we can spare. Of my people freezing while I build your palace in the south. Of 1,000 small and not so small things. She is not afraid of your beasts. She is afraid of your will." Daenerys considered that with dignity. "A body and a will both have to be walked," she said finally. "If you leave either sitting for a long time, they will not carry you where you want to go." He had nothing better to say than true, and he did not wish to invent something that would sound like applause. She held out her hand into the pedestal of snow forming on the top of a rain barrel. The dragon's tail slid across his wrist as it reached for something only it saw. He felt how light the bones were under the skin, like a bird's, like an instrument's strings. "Do you love me?" she asked suddenly, without coyness, without softness, only curiosity sharpened by purpose. It was not cruel. It was not kind. It was a queen's question and a woman's. He did not lie. Not yet. He realized he wanted to add that he thought he might. He did not add it because men say that often when they are merely drunk on sweetness. He was not drunk, only not sober. "I will not pretend I do because a hall full of people made us hold hands and put rings on." She nodded. "I do not love you either," she said, and a small relief ran through him like a warm line. "I admire you. That is more than I have had for men I have known. Admiration burns less. It lasts longer. We will need both. We will need more than both," she said. "We will need men who will stand when the wind is wrong. We will need to decide which words matter. We will need to remember not to let priests write our marriages." "Priests did not write ours," he said. "Trees," she said, and they both laughed, foolishly, like two young people who had a moment of "this is ours" in the middle of a very large and watching world. A boy ran into the little garden then, breath steaming, cap askew, eyes wide. He saw them and tried to stop himself and nearly fell again. And the dragon hissed, and the boy put his hands up and said what boys say when they fear they have done wrong and hope to be forgiven for it. "Your graces," he gasped. He had found the plural that no one had given him. "A man from the south. He brings words. For you. For you." They followed him because he could not be stopped and because the gods like to take the first day of a marriage and give it a messenger. In the hall the man stood ankle deep in melted snow, cloak wet, boots dirty. He looked like 1,000 other men who had walked hard on bad roads. His face was nothing. His words were something. "King's Landing," he said. "They say the imp, Lord Tyrion, he has barrels of wildfire opened in the cellars. They say Stannis has put his ships into the Blackwater and the water is going to burn. They say..." He looked at Daenerys and made the mistake of addressing her as if she were a pretty wife warming herself. He did not make it again after she looked at him. "They say the Lannisters mean to make a pyre of the sea and call it victory." Robb felt the weight of a plan settling on him like a cloak flung by a larger man. He looked at Daenerys to see what she thought of another man's fire. "The South loves to play at fire," she said, and something old and tired and cruel moved under her words like a shark. "Let them burn themselves as long as their burning warms no one else. But it will. It always does. There is no such thing as a man burning alone in a city." "We cannot be there tomorrow," Robb said, and the ache of admitting it was like a cut. "We cannot put your beasts in the air and have them eat wildfire for us. We have men here who must eat before night falls. We need ships," Wyman Manderly said softly, patting his belly as if ships were tucked under it. "We have some. We have enough to make some noise. We do not have enough to fight the capital. But we have enough to take men from one mouth of one river to another. We can fill them with men from the neck." We can fill them with men from islands. Bear Island, Yora said, thinking of home, maybe, or simply of something north enough that he could say its name without remembering everything it reminded him of. Roose Bolton rolled a drop of cider in his glass as if it were an eye. We could send a message to the Ironborn, he said, casual as a man suggesting a new song. Tell them there is salt to be had south. The Ironborn take what they want without messages, Meech said, disdain in every line. The Ironborn want kings, Roose continued, and to Robb's ear he sounded as if he were telling someone else a thing and not saying it for his king. They will pick a salt king as they always do. We could sometimes be served to let them pick it and then take it away. It keeps them occupied with their own pride. Daenerys did not look at Bolton. She looked at Robb. We need to hold what we have with the fingers we have while we grow more. We need to decide where the first cut goes. The first cut, Robb said, goes north. It surprised his counsel. It surprised him a little to say it aloud. But he had dreamed of the wall often in the last weeks, and each time the wind in his dream had a voice like the scraping of 1,000 small claws across ice. He thought of Jon again and felt how the thought had teeth. The Lannisters will not be short of enemies in a month, he said. Stannis or no, there will be men who smell the blood and come with whatever they have polished for years in their cellars. We cannot take King's Landing now. We can ensure that when we do, it will be from a north that will not fall apart like wet bread the moment we march out of it. We need winter grain. We need Theon Greyjoy to remember where he was made a man. The name was a rock thrown into a quiet pond. The ripples went out in circles. Some angry, some glad, some curious. Yora glanced at Robb under his lowered brow as if measuring where the name would land when it came back in. We will send for him, Catelyn said, not because she liked to say the name, but because she was not a woman to leave a stone where it would trip a running man. We will require his fealty with a letter that he cannot mistake. He will mistake what he wants to, Robb said, but he will read it. Write it strong, Wyman Manderly said, and then he smiled. And write a second, stronger address to his father. And write a third, strongest of all, address to his sister. Women read more carefully. We will go to Winterfell, Daenerys said, and the room shifted very slightly as if on a boat. If I am to be queen of men who call themselves wolves, I should see their den. It is partly burned, Robb said, and there was the salt in his mouth again. The news had arrived already, thin and stubborn. Theon Greyjoy, who had been a brother under his father's roof, whose laughter had been a new, coarse noise in their halls once, had taken the castle when men's backs were turned. He had boasted. He had lost it in shame and blood. There were black places on stone where fire had eaten and been dragged away. Daenerys's eyes were grave. Then we will look at what survived. We go first to Winterfell, Robb said, looking at Roose. Then we will look south. We have to. He did not say why. He did not say that there was a cold thing moving in the woods beyond the wall, a cold thing Jon had not written to him about, but that Robb felt like a chill in a bone that had been broken once and mended. He did not say that the marriage he had just made had been as much for this cold thing as for the hot ones in the south. I will take my ships and have them prepared for river work, Wyman Manderly said, satisfied with supper and politics both. I will send word to Lord Serwyn and to the Glovers. I will find coin where coin has hidden and drag it into my counting room. Roose Bolton drank his cider and his eyes were as mild as milk. I will send my men to the Dreadfort to make ready for the king and queen's passage, he said. I will write to my bastard. Do that, Robb said, and felt the first itch of a future rash. Bolton's bastard was a word men did not like to say if they intended to eat comfortably later. He did not intend to eat comfortably until he had counted the people in his hall and found none missing. That night, when the hall was quiet again and men had found corners for their dice and their griefs, Robb and Daenerys stood in a smaller chamber carved into the den's thick stone and faced each other like two combatants who had chosen to fight with empty hands. He did not know how to make a night like this into romance. He did not know if he wanted to. He did not want to pretend at anything. He had had enough of pretending to lords and to himself. She did not pretend either. She closed the door herself. She untied her cloak herself and put the wolf gray over the back of a chair. The dragon on her shoulder hissed. She touched it and it stilled, like a child with its mother's fingers on its shoulder. "We will be watched more keenly than any two people in this land," she said. "Let us decide now what we will do when we cannot move without eyes following." "Let us not be cruel for their entertainment," he said. "Let us not be kind for it either," she countered. "Let us be ourselves and let them learn that a king and a queen can be so and still do their work. If they think we are a story, they will turn us into one with our help or not." He laughed, the short laugh of a man who suddenly recognized his companion as someone who could take his jokes and return them shaped better. "We make no bargains with minstrels. We make none with priests," she said. "And we make none with old men who do not know yet that their sons are not them." He felt like a man standing on a frozen lake and discovering that the thickness held. He took a breath. "I will not hurt you if I can help it," he said, because he needed to say it, even if it made him sound like a boy. "You will," she said simply. "So will I. That is not a problem. That is a shape. We will walk around it." He did not reach for her then. They stood near enough to feel each other's breath and far enough that each could have pretended to be alone. The dragons watched with quick, dispassionate attention. The sea beat its slow hand on the harbor wall. She stepped closer first. The bell in her hair barely chimed. When they kissed, their mouths were cool. They were careful and not timid. He felt the line of her shoulder under the fabric. He felt the ring with the 3 heads on his finger press into the curve of her spine, so that when they broke apart she turned and looked at the red imprint and smiled at the mark it made. Outside, White Harbor continued its own marriages. Hook to fish, hand to coin, whispers to lips. On the quay, a woman told her boy that kings and queens were people like anyone else and then corrected herself because it felt like lying in front of the moon-made statue. In the new castle, a man whose father had loved the Targaryens wept into a pie and said nothing he would be ashamed to repeat tomorrow. Far north, in a tower of black stone and old wind, a boy with a wolf sleeping on his feet stirred and opened eyes that saw the world under the world. He saw a girl white as snow under a tree and a boy with hair like the bracken, and he saw 3 small fires that thought themselves the size of houses. The ravens stirred on their perches, and one croaked a word that was not a name and was one. On the wall, Jon Snow leaned his forearms on the old ice and looked out over a landscape that did not want looking at. A wind moved over the frozen skin of the land and found his face and told him he was not alone. He did not believe the wind. He was learning not to believe anything that did not also leave a mark on the snow. Ghost lifted his head without opening his eyes and made a low sound. Somewhere below, men were arguing in voices clever at sounding brave. Jon did not listen to them. He listened to his own breath and thought of wolves, of dragons, of a letter that had not yet flown. Tywin Lannister sat in his tent with a quill that did not blot. He closed his eyes for a moment and did the thing he did best. Arranged men like pebbles on a game board until the weight of them promised to turn any future river. He did not like the word dragon entering his tent without his say. He did not like the way the word made lesser men's eyes go soft or bright. He sharpened the quill, he sharpened his mind, he sharpened his first plan and his second. At Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon watched the headless shadow of a man flicker across a wall and disliked that he could not touch it. He did not like melting wax composited into men who were not there. He did not like gods. He liked victory and he liked his own justice, and he liked that a man might stand on a cold rock and not be moved. Fire, when it came, was necessary. He did not like that it belonged to another. The winter to come belonged to no one. The morning after the wedding, White Harbor woke with snow that had decided to commit to its own fall. Robb and Daenerys stood at the edge of the quay and watched men wrap ropes and glare at clouds, watched Wyman's ships lift their noses at the idea of going out in such a temper. The dragons perched on the capstan and tried to eat the flakes. Grey Wind put his nose up to catch them and then sneezed in a way that made the great Jon howl with laughter and slap 5 men on the back as if they had accomplished something. "We go north now," Robb said. "We go south after," Daenerys said, quiet and sure. "We go against men and against what is not men," he said, and when she looked at him, he held the look for a long moment, a test of a bridge they had not yet crossed. "In the north, we speak of things that do not die. In your land, perhaps your dragons were a story. Here, the stories walk." "In my land," Daenerys said, "stories eat men too." He nodded. "Then we are both literate." She smiled. It was the smile that had made him understand he might come to love her. He did not admit that to himself yet, not fully. There was time for the word to take root. The city watched them leave as if something rare that had washed up from sea might decide to turn and leave a gift on the shore. Snow fell in thin, steady curtains. Bells on ships chimed in a language that asked for mercy and gave none. The men of the watch on the walls followed two figures and a wolf and three beasts that were not ravens with their eyes until they were small. Then they turned back to their own world, because fish were to be gutted and knives to be sharpened and children to be fed. And kings and queens did their work in one place while the city did its own. On the road north, as the land began to shake off its salt and become itself again, Robb offered Daenerys the reins to his horse as if asking her to share a thing he loved most next to fighting. She declined gracefully and led her own mount through a patch of winter-thin sunlight. She reached out once, two fingers spread, and let the white grasses brush her palm. Snow caught in her eyelashes and remained, because in that moment she blinked less than the rest of the world. "Tell me of your gods," she said, not because she meant to adopt them, but because she meant to know them as one knows neighbors one intends not to quarrel with more than necessary. "Tell me what they like and what they hate." "They do not say," he said. "They show. They do not love blood for its own sake. They are not pleased by spectacles. They prefer men to keep their word and their knives sharp for real need. They like you to be quiet sometimes. They do not require kneeling. They like the honest parts of a man and do not have much to say about his show. They would not do well in the free cities," she said dryly, and he laughed, the first untroubled laugh he had given the sky in a season. "And yours?" he asked. He had seen the way she treated the Red Priest, like a cow that might kick at any moment. "My gods have been taken from me and given back and taken again," she said. "I think some of them may have only ever been shadows on a wall. I think some of them are dragons. I am not sure which is more dangerous. The Red God asks for things I do not like to give, and then when he gives, I do not like how he gave. The gods of my fathers liked to see their blood in the mouths of their dragons and their song on men's lips. I think I will like your trees. They say nothing and see everything. Perhaps they talk to your dragons when we sleep," he said. "Perhaps they warn them not to light half the country when they sneeze. They have not sneezed yet," she said, but she touched each little head anyway, murmuring names into scales that would one day strip a spear of its steel. When they came to Winterfell, fire scars like black hands were on the walls where Theon had made his phantoms of lordship and Ramsay Snow had made very real ugliness. The yard smelled of old smoke and new clean hay where men had worked hard to make it smell of anything else. The heart tree stood in its godswood as it had 1,000 years. The snow on its branches looked permanent and theatrical at once. Daenerys walked under Tach and did not ask if she might. She put her palm against the bark. It was wet. It was cold. She seemed pleased by the way it told her it was a thing and not a story. The people of Winterfell came out to look at her, and Daenerys looked back. She asked the name of a woman whose apron had been patched so cleverly one could not see the patch unless one wanted to. She asked which child had climbed the wall and fallen off last spring and had lived because snow is generous when it chooses. She asked where they kept wool. She asked what they ate when the ice on the pools was thick and no fish would let itself be taken. She asked, and the North, surprised into honesty, told her. She listened. She said little. When she had words, they were not about silk roads and spices that would never see a northern pot. She said, "We will need more wood. My beasts are greedy." And she said, "I do not know what this means, but I will learn." And she said, "I am sorry for your dead." In a tone that was not the southern "how sad," but the northern "I will help carry that if you wish." At night, when they lay together in the very room where Robb had lain as a boy with maps spread half under him and dreamed of hunting more than men, He told her the names of the servants who had kept him from breaking his neck on Winterfell steps. She told him the names of the women who had kept her alive in cities that would have sold her for a bolt of decent fabric if their money had been short. Once, in the middle of his telling, snow slid off the eave and fell past their window with a sound like a sigh. He stopped speaking and listened. She squeezed his hand. Not comfort, not fear, only recognition that he had heard a story outside and wanted to know if it was one of his. He let the silence have the room for a breath. Then he went on. Plans were written, orders sent. Ravens tied with strings to carry dictates and entreaties and small foolish boasts north, south, east, west. Roose Bolton's letters traveled with a speed that never promised honesty. Wyman Manderly's men began to count salted herring like coin, neat stacks, neat hopes. Catelyn wrote to Riverrun with words that did not hide that she had stood under a tree and watched her son wed a girl with dragons. She had not thought she would write such a letter when she was a girl who had thought of witty Southerners and kind Northern men. She wrote it anyway because the world did not ask permission before becoming strange. On the third morning, Robb woke with a start because gray wind was on his feet and his hackles were high, the fur on his spine a ridge of warning. Daenerys's dragons woke with him, their chests expanding, necks rising like drawn bows. The room had changed temperature not by degrees but by intent. Cold had a will to it. Robb threw on his cloak and went to the wall. The early light was the color of a blade's edge. In the yard, a rider reeled. He had ridden too hard through weather and fear. His horse's flanks twitched under a whiteness that was not snow. He slid off and staggered. His eyes were wrong. Robb ran, and someone else did. And then more men realized this was not a messenger who could wait for their orderly curiosity. "The wall," the man whispered, and the word cracked in his mouth like a brittle sweet. "The dead walk. The Lord Commander says." He did not say what the Lord Commander said. His mouth opened and made a shape that had no sound. He fell. Men lifted him as if he might blow away. Robb turned toward Daenerys because his first thought was for her now. What to tell, what to ask, what to do with the things he could not fix. She was already moving. She had flung her cloak over her shoulders and come through the door barefoot, hair unbound, looking more like a story than any other moment he had seen her and less like one at the same time. "Fire," she said, and the dragons, as if they had been waiting to be told a word they knew in their ribs, lifted, beat their wings and screamed. He had thought he would ride south soon with the weight of vengeance and a new wife's hand like a brand on his arm. Now his road had turned west to the wall and then beyond it. He felt no surprise. He felt, for the first time since the raven had thumped black against his shutters at Riverrun, no conflict. He felt like a man who had finally been told what the day he had prepared for his whole life would ask of him. "Send for torches," he said, and men moved. "Send for grain. Send for every man who can walk with a spear or light a fire without setting his own hair ablaze." He looked at Daenerys. "We go to your cold now. We learn if your fire warms more than a kitchen." "It burns," she said, and the line of her mouth was not arrogant. It was a bar of iron passed through flame and quenched without cracking. "It burns and it forgives nothing. It asks for everything. It will be enough if we do not fail it." He did not say the pretty thing. He did not say, "We cannot fail because men do, and that is how the gods keep balance." He said, "We will bring more wood than we think we need." And she, understanding that this was the vow he could make, nodded once, and the bell in her hair chimed a small, bright agreement no one else heard. Winterfell woke with them. The old stones shifted, satisfied to have young feet running where they had been careful and slow. The heart tree tasted the breath of the dragons and recognized something in it older than the houses of men. The ravens took the sky again, black on white, letters tied to legs, dipped wings, and disappeared into a morning, becoming a day that would become a season and then a tale, if any lived to tell it. And in the long hall, where the fires had been banked low and would be wakened soon, a piece of parchment lay forgotten on the table where maps were spread. It was a list Catelyn had made, a list of people to feed and gates to fix and debts to pay. At the bottom, in her tidy, careful hand, one more line had been added in the quiet moments after the wedding. It read simply, Teach them both to laugh when no one else is looking." The snow fell without noticing the line. The man who lifted the parchment to move it nearer the fire to dry did not read it. He did not see the last line. But the spirit of it warmed the hall all the same, in places where men did not think to look for warmth. It would matter later in ways none of them could yet guess. The road ahead was a white line drawn under a gray sky. Fires would mark it. Names would change upon it. Wolves and dragons would learn one another's instincts as well as they could, and then they would learn the lands, which were older. Somewhere, beyond even the wall, things old as the first winter woke to the sound of bells they had never heard before, and their cold curiosity moved out across the snow like a shadow. It was a beginning. It was never only that. They left Winterfell in a hush of breath that made men whisper more softly without knowing why. The sound of the dragon's wings found its echo in the trees. The wolf's padding made the snow think twice about where to fall. Men were gathered from crofts and byres and the clustered houses under the walls. Boys with spears too long for them and old men with scars they carried like letters of introduction to the winter. Catelyn stood on the steps and watched them go, the way a woman watches ships heading out past a bar that has caught and broken more than one hull. She lifted her hand when Robb looked back and could not tell whether he saw the blessing she meant or the warning she could not help. They did not take the King's Road. They took the old hunterways and the thin tracks that a man used when he wanted to arrive unfollowed by rumors. Men moved like ink through the snow-limbed firs. Daenerys rode with her cloak pinned high and her hair braided thicker against the wind, the bells still chiming, but a little lower, as if they had learned the north too. The dragons learned the cold in a day, that the snow would alight on their backs and turn to water that must be shaken, that fire licked at frost and made it run, that their bellies were best warmed in the lee of the wolf where his breath made a tent of steam. Once, near the tail of a frozen stream that still sang under its glass, a shape leaned away from a birch and became a man with his hands up who had hoped to be a tree until they passed. His hair was rope, his eyes gray with smoke, and his spear had the look of a tool shaped again after it had been used to pry up stones. "I come from the Shadow Tower," he croaked when gray wind's teeth bared without a sound. "The wildlings come in people, not in raiders. They come with children. Mance sends words. Winter is not theirs. It belongs to something that walks without breath." Robb took the man's hand and felt how the cold had made it into wood. He gave him a mouthful of Manderley's brandy and watched him get angry, as men do when they find they still can. "Tell your Lord Commander we are coming," he said. "Tell him the north brings wood and fire and a queen with heat to spare. Tell him the wolf and the dragon mean to eat what eats men." The messenger was too tired to laugh at poetry. He nodded and stumbled back into the trees, and the forest took him again as if he had been a thought that had chosen to leave their heads. By the time the wall's blue-white and impossible height rose from the land like a god's blade laid flat, the sky had gone the color of iron. Men had to force themselves to look up. Daenerys did not force herself. She sat her horse and looked until the dragon on her shoulder shifted uneasily, as if that vastness offended it. "It is not a wall," she said softly. "It is a winter that stood still. It stands because the rest moves," Robb said, and watched a wisp of breath drift and tatter and disappear against the ice as if the wall had taken it for itself. The gate at Castle Black was a mouth with a timber tongue. Men moved on it as if standing on a giant's lower lip. The horn sounded once, twice, and then again, a long, low call that made the air seem suddenly older. When the gate opened, it did so reluctantly, as if a thing that had learned to keep wanted to keep even kings out. Jon met them under the shadow of the ice, wearing black that made his skin look thinner and his eyes look like they had learned to be colder than they had been made. He had grown since Robb had last seen him. Not in height, but in something within that made the space he took seem to have corners where there had been only kindness. Ghost walked at his knee, the snow parting gladly for him. They both stopped. There was the briefest nothing. 2 beats of waking from a long, long dream, and then they were brothers again. The word that men say when they cannot bear to say all the others that lean on it. "Robb," Jon said. "Jon," Robb said. And then for a moment laughter and grief were the same taste in their mouths and they swallowed both. Daenerys watched the two of them with a composure that was not distance. She studied how men who had shared a hearth once came to share command without spitting in it. When Jon turned to her, she tipped her head and he bowed an inch low for a woman with dragons and a nose that had learned to ignore incense. "Your Grace," he said to her, with the kind of courtesy that was more like a hand to a rope than a flourish. She looked up at the wall again. "If this falls," she said, "there will be nowhere for men to learn they are brave." "It will not fall today," Jon said. "Not while we have breath, not while we have fire, not while the old gods watch and the new ones do not look away." "You speak as if you have prayed," Robb said, half in affection, half in difficulty. "I have," Jon said simply. "Not to be spared, to be useful." Jeor Mormont, fierce and old and stubborn as a cliff, watched all of it with his arms folded. He moved forward when the courtesies howl. Dee do no more work and gave his words with as few decorations as men give their names on the day the first numbers of their sons are written in a book. "We are not here to make long speeches," he rasped. "The dead walk. They are not many yet, but one dead man is too many when he brings his friends to a fight without asking the living if they are busy. They cross where they please. Fire stops them. Dragonglass breaks them. Swords make them laugh if they could be bothered to remember how." "Dragonglass," Daenerys repeated, tasting the common name as if she were deciding whether to keep it. "Where is there enough for a war?" "Dragonstone," Jon said at once, and a look moved between the old bear and the young one that said much about how quickly they had both decided to say yes to things the Watch would once have called profane. "Sam found it in a book. He has the book if anyone wants to argue with him until spring." Daenerys's mouth softened in pleasure. "Dragonstone is mine," she said. "At least as much as anything stone can be said to belong to anyone. If I ask men to break it and carry the pieces like a bride price to the wall, they will do it. They will drag it up their own throats if you tell them to sweetly enough." The old bear muttered, but his eyes warmed. "Send for it. In the meantime, we have caches we did not know we had. The free folk keep their own bundles of anger. Give us knives, we will give you bodies to use them. Give us words men can say to each other without choking, and we will give you an army that does not worry whether its boots match." Men laughed a little around the edges of the line, men who had not found the shape of their fear yet, and then they stopped as a new cold stepped onto the air like a foot on dry leaves. They saw it first as a distortion, a way the wind moved that wind does not move unless it is making room for a thing it does not like to touch. The light thinned. The snow fell as if embarrassed to be seen. The men who were not brave made their faces look like men who were. The men who were brave made their hands move in practical ways. Torches lit, oil flung, piles of dry sticks dragged into lines that would burn fast and high. Ghosts' lips peeled back without a sound. Grey Wind's body went long with the old memory he had in his bones from wolves that had watched fires before men learned to keep them. The dragons' necks arched as if someone were pulling their heads up by wires only the three of them could see. Daenerys put her hand lightly on the dark shoulder of the nearest, and its chest heaved and the first puff of heat moved the surface of the cold without warming it. What came over the first rise was not a horde. It was a vanguard that wanted to see whether men would embarrass themselves. A handful of figures, walking with the insulting slowness of something that had time to watch you die properly. The first had armor that looked carved out of winter itself. Its eyes were not eyes so much as a remembering of light. It stopped and tilted its head at the sight of a woman with 3 little beasts on her shoulders and 300 men trying very hard not to back away from her or from the thing opposite her. It raised a hand. To Robb's eyes, it looked like a man raising his hand at a bargaining table to make a point he knew would win. The wind complained as it moved. "Now?" Robb asked, because he had learned in war that the better question than what is often when. He did not take his eyes off the thing. "Now," Daenerys said, and spoke in a language that was not of the north, the words long and fluid and full of the knowledge of heat. The dragons answered. Fire went out from their mouths not in a wild rush but in a disciplined line, a ribbon of light that turned the air into a shout. The first of the dead did not run. It did not look surprised, but it stopped. Fire touched it, and where fire touched it, there was the sound of ice cracking on a river in spring. His fingers went to water. Its arm followed. It stepped back. The men behind it stepped forward and then remembered too late that they were not men anymore, and command did not happen here the same way it had on the far side of the wall. Torches made the night visible. Oil made the torches rude and persuasive. Jon's voice went out into the line, low and steady, telling men where to put their fear. There, on the ground in a black puddle between their own feet, where it could not be useful to the thing they faced. Robb's orders were as practical as rain. Move here, hold there. No heroics unless the heroics bring another man home with them. They fought, and the fight was exactly as ugly as everyone tells you it is and more. Whites moved where a man had not expected anything to move, because the eye is used to watching for life, not for something that imitates it badly enough to be effective. Men went down and came up again with their mouths full of curses or full of pink froth that was their own failing breath. Flames did their work. The smell was terrible and memorable. The wall did not care. The wall watched as it had watched before anyone alive remembered. At some point, Robb realized he had been laughing. Not with delight, but with the kind of cracked, appalling mirth that is a man's last way of holding a line that wants to give. He bit the laugh off. He pushed a torch into the face of a thing that had been a young man with a good jaw and perhaps a girl who thought that was important. He did not think of the girl. He thought of the way the thing reeled and then fell apart like poorly stacked plates under a knife. Jon was there and then not and then there again, moving where the line thinned and shoring it up with the way he did not move his feet when other men did. Ghost chose men to save the way wolves choose deer to bring down. Without malice, with utility. The dragon nearest Daenerys coughed once, as if a cold had taken it, and then buried 3 whites under fire. Oh, that their bones ran together like sugar melted in too hot a pan. The other 2 kept their lines disciplined because the woman's voice kept them that way. When the first of the others came up close enough that Robb saw its eyes through the heat haze, he knew the stories had been kind to men. The thing's blade sang when it moved because cold does that sometimes when it is thin enough. He brought his own sword up and felt the shock in his arm when steel met something that was not steel and did not have the manners of steel. The shock went to his shoulder and sat there grinning. Whatever it was smiled without a mouth. Gray wind slammed into it, and the sound it made was new to the world since the last time men had fought them. Fire came and the song ended. The thing fell apart the way winter sometimes falls apart in March. Too slowly for comfort, too quickly to keep. When it was done, it was not done because these fights end more than once. Men walked among their own and kept them from rising if rising would not be good. Someone touched Robb's arm and he turned and found Daenerys looking at him with eyes that were sudden and nearly wild with relief. He reached for her. They stood like that for a heartbeat, both breathing like horses that have done what was asked of them and did not die of it. Jeor Mormont lifted his face to the wall and said something that might have been a prayer or might have been a rude joke addressed to the gods. It was impossible to tell with the old bear. Then he looked at Daenerys and at Robb in turn. "This will be every day," he said, "until it is not. Until someone turns the thing in the dark and makes it look the other way or breaks it the way you break a habit your father taught you when you were 10 and too young to know when to say no." "Every day," Robb said. He heard, in the words, the shape of the rest of the war. He did not let himself be daunted by the shape. He set his teeth into it. "Then we make this ice our exercise yard." Jon looked toward the far north. The wind was different again, the way wind is after it has been told a story and gone away to think about it. "They will bring more," he said, "and we will meet them, but we cannot do it alone. Send your ravens, Lord Manderly. Send them to men who think they are busy further south." Wyman Manderly, who had come up to see the wall once and had perhaps not meant to, looked a little seasick and a little thrilled. He bowed as much as his belly would approve. "The merman sends," he said, and waddled away to find a boy who could put a string on a leg without crying at the cold. They stayed a week, and it was a week longer than the old stories had thought queens could bear. Daenerys learned the names of a dozen men who had thought they would die without ever seeing a woman's face again without paying for it. She learned where the wind found the cracks in the stone tower and how to stuff them with rags and laughter. She learned how to speak to her dragons with fewer words and more intention. so that their fire was less a trick and more a sentence in a long conversation. She and Robb spoke the practical language of rations, shifts, the simple arithmetic of keeping men breathing. At night, when the cold pressed itself against the thick walls like a stubborn guest, they lay with their feet shoved toward a brazier and their heads turned toward one another and traded the kind of stories that men do not tell their armies. The way their mother's hands smelled when they made winter bread, the particular pleasure of catching the first snowflake on the lip, the times they had been wrong about things and had been glad later to have been wrong. Ravens went south with words that were not pretty but were urgent. Some messages flew on their own feet. One reached Riverrun with its feathers frozen stiff around its legs, and Edmure fumbled it into sense with fingers that had bound other messages the summer past and had let them go with the same reluctant hope. One flew to the twins and perched on a beam above a man who was too old to be careful and too mean to be wise. He threw salt at it and called it an omen sent by a woman who would get above her station if the river let her. The bird preened and shat on his pudding and then left. One found the Dreadfort. The man who took it had pale eyes and careful lips and a habit of not moving unless he meant to. He read the message and smiled a smile that did not move the top half of his face. He folded the message and put it away where men keep things to show later at a time of their choosing. The answer from Dragonstone came with a swiftness that meant Daenerys' name had weight even where her foot had not yet stepped. Galleys put north as if the sea would set if they were late. Miners broke black glass with reverence and fear and loaded it into crates with straw as if it were the eggs of a dangerous bird. The first ship found White Harbor and a second turned to Gulltown with a captain who had made bets with himself about weather. Wyman wept when he saw the cargo, partly for relief and partly because his harbormaster had told him what it had cost in coin and in hands. "Send it," he said, blowing his nose into lace and wiping his eyes with a laugh that made the lace a better handkerchief for it. "If we have to eat fish with no lemon for a season, we will teach our cooks to remember what salt is for." With the walls breathing steadied for the moment, with caches dug and lines agreed upon and messages tied to birds whose small hearts did work far out of proportion to their size, Robb had to be the thing kings never quite manage: 2 men at once. He would not be a southern fool and leave the north to sit untended as a sow with a litter. He would not be a northern fool and forget that the lions in the south had teeth and patience. "Catelyn goes to the twins," he said, and watched the men in the room flinch out of habit. "She goes with Wyman's banners and does not go aloe. The phrase will think one thing and think it twice. The third thought will be the one that matters. We must make sure it is ours." "Walder Frey does not change," Jon said, and Ghost looked toward the south with a disdain wolves have when thinking of sneaks. "Stones do," Daenerys said. "With time, with water, with the right weight on them." The plan was simple and ugly and kind to no one's appetite. It involved cooks and singers and the kind of promises men rescind with a knife if they can. It involved a drink buyer's call convincing. It involved men with packages under their shirts that did not jingle because the scrap iron had been wrapped in cloth. It involved Wyman Manderly remembering he was a lord as well as a baker and that both trades had knives. The day Catelyn rode away, Daenerys came to the yard to watch her mount. The two women had made a new thing between them that was not exactly love and not exactly mutual admiration and certainly not anything one could have told a bard without making him leave out whatever would not fit his tune. They looked at each other for a long moment, the way women do when they have decided a man is not the only axis of the world. "You must come back," Daenerys said, "because there are some things too obvious for men to say out loud, and only women remember that saying them sweetens the fate they name." "I must," Catelyn said, and then laughed at herself for the superstition of it, and then did not laugh, because she was a woman and could carry two opposite thoughts without staggering. "If I meet your enemies, I will smile at them and show them where their own feet will put them. If I meet your friends, I will pour their cups and make them comfortable without letting them think comfort is a habit." "Good," Daenerys said, and then put her hand to Catelyn's cheek with a gentleness that surprised them both. "I am learning your son. I would like to keep your counsel. It is a good thing." "Keep his counsel too?" Catelyn said back, and then turned her horse because it is harder to leave slowly than quickly. They went to the twins with a train that would only fit over the bridge with the Lord's good humor. and good humor could be bought and had to be bought with a little insult to make it taste right to the man receiving it. Wyman talked about pies until Walder's eyes went the way a cat's do when it is thinking about strings. His sons stood like badly planted trees. His daughters looked like children who had learned to count so they could be married off at better prices. Caitlin moved through the hall as if the floor might collapse, and she had chosen which plank she would carry with her if it did. She smiled at Walder's jokes as a woman smiles at a man's cleverness when it suits her to make him think he is clever. She waited. In the third course, when the singers had given up trying to give the room a melody and had fallen back on the reliable job of making everyone able to hear their own knives, Wyman caught the eye of a boy at the far end of the board. He raised a piece of bread and broke it and did not eat it. The boy, who had been told to watch the fat lord because sometimes men with appetites have appetites for things other than food, watched the bread and, because he was young and unaccustomed to treachery that asked for patience, moved his hand toward the knife the way a rabbit twitches when it smells fox. Caitlin saw three things at once: the boy's hand, the old man's head turn, the way the arch over the west door had a crack that had not been there last spring when she had counted them. She put her palm on the table. It was the only warning anyone got. The twins learned, that night, what it had cost Robb not to put a knife in Walder Frye when he was 18 and could have thought that was a clever solution. They learned what a patient woman can do when she speaks to men who think cooking is women's work. Doors stuck as if the wood itself was angry. Pitch poured where men who thought themselves brave would step because brave men tell stories about walking toward danger and do not look up to see that carts with barrels have moved. Walder's second son stood to insult a song at the precise moment a panel under his foot folded down, and his insult turned into a squeal so undignified even he could not bear it. A rope went tight. A banner fell. A dozen men found suddenly that the wives they had brought for show were better with knives than they had expected, and their surprise cost them their fingers. Caitlin herself did no killing. She did not need to. She stood where everyone must watch and said in a voice that might have belonged to a woman telling a carpenter where to put a shelf, "By the law of the river, by the law of the guest right you used for sport, I declare the bridge closed and the Lord who would keep it closed for his private spite removed. You called us meat, Lord Frye. Today we name you bone and break you to make broth." Walder opened his mouth. Whatever he meant to say, clever, cruel, unrepentant, became air when a dragon's shadow slid over the high windows and a thin line of fire traced itself across the lintel and licked at the banners with 3 quick kisses. The hall stank of singed fabric and old fear. Walder's eyes went as hard as anchors. They looked at the fire and looked away and found Caitlin's instead. He saw then that the game he had thought so finely his was the oldest one. He had picked a fight with winter and then gotten angry when spring came with a torch. They did not skin him. They did not make pies of him. They did not do any of the things men with sick imaginations do when they have a pen and time. They judged him the way the old law names it. If a man holds a bridge for ransom, he has declared himself a robber, and robbers lose their claim to the safety of their own floors. They took him to the arch with the crack. They set him on a chair that had been moved there for the purpose. They let him speak unt. He had emptied his mouth of bile and was reduced to spittle. Then Caitlin lifted her hand and Wyman lowered his, and the first stone from the arch came away. Men followed the plan instead of their anger, which was more satisfying than their anger would have been. The arch sagged, the chair tipped. The old man, who had always thought himself above the river, fell into it, took him as if it had been waiting. It gave him back in a place where anyone could fish him up if they wanted the shape of their victory, and then it took that as well, as rivers do when they have been asked to do one favor too many. The twins woke to a different lord, a 10th son who had not been intended for anything but counting sheep, and discovered he liked counting better than his father had. He signed a paper that said that the bridge would never again be closed for the sake of a man's temper. He gave Caitlin bread and salt and did not forget to eat some himself, and then asked if she would kindly leave so he could throw his father's knives into the river and make his own with a clearer edge. She left him to it because some victories require letting someone else think they are theirs if you want them to last. Bolton was not at the twins to see the hall learn. He was at the Dreadfort where the snow fell in patterns that pleased him, and his men moved with the quiet that makes honest men nervous. He had received a letter with the Lannister seal and later burned it in a dish that had flayed men carved around its rim. because punctual men like their symbols to agree with their deeds. He had written his own letters. He had sent his own birds. Robb returned from the wall with the black glass like night heaped in his stores, and with a quiet that came to men who had worked hard and done enough for 1 week not to die. He looked at Winterfell with the eyes of a man who had left a thing in his cellar and hoped no one had stolen it while he was gone. He questioned his captains, and they told him what Catelyn had sent in her small, terse hand. Walder was gone. The bridge was open. Wyman had eaten too little at the feast and had been praised for his moderation, and the rare thing had made him giddy. "Roose has not sent word," Galbart Glover said, frowning in the way men do when they are thinking that frowning is not very useful and doing it anyway. "Roose sends nothing until he thinks you will like the nothing," Meej Mormont growled. "He'll send when he can write your death into the letter and make it look like a receipt for oats." Robb nodded and turned where the weirwood in the godswood made a wall of white behind a face with eyes that had watched better men say they were surprised. He went there at dusk with Daenerys, because he found that her presence stood well beside that carved old grief. They walked without speaking until the pool was a blackness that made the sky look soft. "Your mother is alive," Daenerys said. He smiled into the dark at his own relief. "Yes, and I have a river to thank as well as her stubbornness. The river and a cook's cleverness." "We must be stern with your cooks," Daenerys murmured. "They are political weapons. They must be regulated." They went back to the hall together and found Roose Bolton waiting by the fire, pale as water meat and as bland. He bowed to Daenerys like a man who had learned where to put his head for queens and liked to think his neck was too long for comfort. He turned to Robb and arranged his mouth politely. "Your Grace," he said, "an unfortunate business at the Twins. Messy." Robb did not raise his eyebrows. "Civilized," he said. "A court, a law, an enforcement. Civilization is the most dangerous thing," Roose said. "It makes men think they have permission." "From who?" Daenerys asked, and Roose turned his head toward her like a fish reminded that a bird sometimes dives. "From the idea that their decency will be noticed," he said. "By whatever notices." "Sometimes it is," she said, and her dragons lifted their heads like 3 officials about to place their seals on a document. They kept him for supper. He watched which spoon Daenerys took and took the other. He cut his meat so evenly it made the men near him want to shake him for it. He said little. When he spoke, it was to say things like how much salt should be taken from the stores if men were to march south and not find themselves drinking with tongues so dry they could not pronounce the words for their oaths. He asked questions that made people take their own heads out of their desires like ducks out of a pond. He was boon companion to no one, and sometimes that is a virtue in a council. It was after midnight when he went to his chambers, and after midnight when Rat, a boy too old for his name who had never liked it, came with a tray of wine and bread and a folded letter hidden under the cloth as he had been told to do. Roose took the letter and pinched the boy's cheek as if he did not actually like to touch men's skin. He unfolded the letter with fingers that did not hurry. He read. His pale lashes flickered only a little, as if the ink had thrown a spark. In the morning, a raven flew with a message that turned up unexpectedly at Harrenhal, where Tywin Lannister had set up his clever, cruel camp, and announced a meeting on the Green Fork with polite words that could be read as invitation or threat. Tywin always chose both. He moved his men and left behind ashes that had already been ashes before he moved in, because that was the joke he liked best. Stealing destruction's glory. He rode, and his men rode, and Ramsay Snow rode with a face like a flat field under gray weather, and the two forces met where a washed-out bank made the horses put up their heads the way they do when they smell something that isn't fish. Tywin had chosen the place because he always did. He looked over the ground and saw nothing he had not seen before. He saw the banners, which told a story he trusted himself to read. He saw the men. He saw no dragons. Roose Bolton raised his hand in greeting and trotted forward with 3 of his men, amiable as a host arriving early to see whether the tables had been laid properly. "My lord," he said to Tywin, and the title was a gift of the old world to the new, an elegant insult. Tywin looked at Bolton the way a man looks at a second knife on a table. "Did I put that there?" "Well," he said, "is the boy ready to die then?" Roose smiled his bland smile. "Which boy?" he asked, and when Tywin's eyes flickered, Bolton tapped his glove against his thigh and let a small, tidy signal run out through men who were watching nothing and everything. Behind Tywin, from the low line of the bank, where the snow had been not quite snow, where a farmer's ditch had been something else for 3 days, where Wyman Manderley's engineers had made the land learn a new trick, fire rose. It did not come from dragons. It came from the ground where oil had settled under wet straw and waited. It came up in a skin and took the shape of a wall far too quickly for courtesy. Horses screamed, and men who had thought themselves clever in ambushes choked on their own surprise. The first line broke. Tywin held his ground because he always did until he did not. He turned his horse in a tight circle and looked at Roose Bolton, who had not moved his hands. Ramsay Snow moved instead. He moved like a man who had spent his life practicing how to look as if he did not know how to move and now was allowed to show it. He put his heel to his horse. He came out from behind the curve of Tywin's line as if he had been attached to the man by string all along. He raised his axe. Bolton lifted his hand, which was also the signal for the second trick in the ditch. Frozen water broke where it had been persuaded to hold by well-placed planks and weight. The ditch became a small, ugly river. Ramsay's horse went in up to its chest. He dragged it out with brute, angry strength and took 3 steps and was through the fire and then into new men who had not been there a moment before and were suddenly there in a line so straight a mason would have nodded. They were men with spears cut short for the work. They were men who disliked Boltons on principle. They were Karstarks and Mormonts and Serwins and Glovers and men who used to be Umbers and still were, and they had been moved overnight with Wyman's boats and with the kind of secrecy that follows when a woman writes the orders and does not tell the singers about them. Tywin went to wheel. His horse slipped. He took it up again and found himself looking into a mouth of wolves and a line of spears and one woman who was riding just behind the first rank, not to be admired but to be useful. And she looked at him the way a midwife looks at a man who has fainted at his wife's labor. "Lord Tywin," Catelyn said, and inclined her head. "You will go no further this morning." He did not answer her. He did not need to. He put his heels in and cut hard for the left, and might have made it if the air had not turned to noise and heat and decision. The dragons came low, not a grand show, not a king's pageant, but a working sweep, and their fire licked the oil and took it and made it rise into the sky in a sheet that never wanted to go back down. Men dropped without thinking. The oil did its work. The frost broke where it had been told to break. The bank gave. The second ditch opened, and men in lion colors went into water they had thought was ground and learned otherwise. The dragons were too small still to make true slaughter among lines that had not yet grown bored of living. They did not need to. The earth did it for them. Tywin's men were not boys. They turned and made their own lines where their old lines had been burned across the face. They covered him as he went, and he went, because there comes a moment when even the cleverest men put their cleverness away and choose to have their skin another day. He went with none of the tidy disappointment he had practiced all his life. He went with something like respect, which perhaps stung worse for him. Bolton watched him go. He did not look disappointed either. He looked as if a page of his book had turned and the new page had the same sentences as the old but in a different hand. He turned his horse. He tried to go the way Tywin had gone. Meage's axemen had other thoughts. They let him through because they had been told to. They let him run because they had been told to. Catelyn watched him and Roose did what he had always done best. He survived. Sometimes that is a victory. Sometimes it is only a note in a ledger. The field stank of burned oil and men. Wyman Manderley waded in and fished. He fished a woman out who coughed and then laughed and then wept because the laughter had moved something she had not wanted moved. He fished a boy he could not name, and his mouth went tight. He fished something that shone green under the water and found it was a ring that had fallen off a hand that had gone somewhere else. He put the ring in his pocket. He would give it to someone later who would treasure it because it had come out of fire and water and lived. That mattered. After the battle, after the men who had not died had been counted and their names written in a book that would be read in a quiet room later with a sigh after each line, they sat in a half-collapsed barn, smoke lying in gentle stripes under the rafters, and spoke of ending rather than fighting. "We can press," the great John said. his beard still smoking a little, as if it had grown from a log thrown too near a fire. "They're shaken. Push them until their teeth fall out." "We press where?" Daenerys asked, clean as a knife. "Into a city that will eat us street by street while your men forget which house has our banner and which has theirs? We push at a throat that is determined to choke until we have no more fingers to put there. We starve them," Wyman said, dry as to st. "We shut the roads that carry their pride in sacks and barrels. We make them sell their toys. We make mothers lie to their babes and tell them the city is not hungry while they grow thin enough to fit their wedding rings on their smallest fingers. It is an ugly way, but sometimes better than an axe through the front door. While the wall fights every day," Jon said, who had come south to show that the North was two things at once now. "You want an ending? End the habit of having to fight two wars with one pair of hands." Robb listened. He had learned that the part of being a king that most irritated men who thought they might want to be kings themselves was the part where a man did not speak for a long time. He looked at Daenerys and found her looking at him in the same moment. It was not a lover's look. It was the look two craftsmen give each other when they both have their hands on a log they mean to saw in half and they want the cut to be straight. "Cut the root," he said. "We melt the throne," Daenerys said at the same time, and then they both smiled, not because it was pretty, but because it was true. King's Landing was not preparedness for once. It had burned itself on the night of Stannis' attempt and still smelled like a candle that had guttered itself and left a stain. Cersei had walled herself in a garden that had been meant for children and had not noticed she had forgotten the children. Tyrion, Balm of the Wounded, had a scar down his face now and a way of holding himself as if he had been introduced to his own mortality and had asked it to sit and talk for a while. He rode out to meet the envoys on a donkey, as if to make men think less of him before they had to endure thinking more. "Your Grace," he said to Daenerys, and his bow was lower than hers had been the day she had watched the old bear give his. "Lovely weather for an ending. I am pleased to inform you that we are not as ready as we would like to be." "We very often are not," Daenerys said, and her dragons nosed the air over his head curiously. "It does not stop us. It stops some," Tyrion said, eyeing the creatures with the particular deep amusement of a man who would like to die in a way that lets him explain his jokes until the last gasp. "They did not take King's Landing with a sack. They took it with a siege that was gentle to the extent it could be, and that set its cruelty in the places cruelty would teach a necessary lesson. Food went in. The city was not made to suffer more than it had done already. The Red Keep was cut from its lifeblood and found itself to be only a red stone on a hill. Men came over the walls into Daenerys' camp at night and offered their swords for food. She took the swords and the men and kept both busy so neither would rust. The Hound came with a girl who had cut her hair and her name. He gave Daenerys the long stare men give a woman they had once thought would be just another soft thing and said, without flattery, "You make sense." The girl looked at Robb and then looked away quickly and then looked back with her mouth set. "Arya?" she said before anyone had asked. A kind of defiance and a kind of relief that made Catelyn weep when she heard it later while no one was looking, because a woman can hide her tears better than a man. Cersei tried one last time to play a story she had been promised would work. The sight of a woman with a babe at her breast and a crown in her hair. But the babe was gone, the crown a poor substitute for mercy, and the city was finished with listening to someone else tell it what it should be. She came down from her garden and walked into Daenerys' tent and asked if she might drink some of that wine that always looks so red when other people have it. "You may," Daenerys said, and poured it, and they both drank and watched each other over the edge of their cups like women who know neither of them will ever be completely safe from the other and have decided to be honest about it. Tyrion brought a key. It was the key to everything and nothing. It opened the iron gate that had looked harder than policy. He gave it to Daenerys because someone had to hand her a thing and see how she treated it. She took it and did not discard it and did not make a show of keeping it either. She turned to Robb. They climbed the steps of the Red Keep together. The dragons came into the hall as if they had been there before. The banners in the rafters said they had. They stood before a chair made of the old pride of men. It was uglier than a thing ought to be when so much blood had been spilled for it. It had the look of a sword collection a boy had glued together in a fit and been praised and never told to put away. Daenerys stood and looked, and her eyes did a thing that Robb had come to recognize as the movement right before she made a decision that would make men sigh with relief later and complain about in their cups, because complaining is as much a habit as breathing. "It is not a throne," she said. "It is a wound. Wounds sometimes teach," Tyrion observed, fiddling with the hem of his one good glove. "But you are not wrong. It was meant to prick men when they became lazy," Daenerys said. "It made them bleed and think the bleeding was proof they were important. It is a poor teacher." She lifted her hand and the dragons rose with a sound that made the men nearest the door think of leaving and then not leave. "Melt it," they obeyed. Fire changed the room's weather. Iron moaned when it learned it would not be weapon anymore. The blade spines ran, fell, puddled. The puddle spread into a sheet. Daenerys held out her hand and the fire paused, because she had learned how to speak to it, and because this was a place where magic liked to be told what to do for once. She made the sheet thin. She made it trickle. She made it fall through channels that had been dug the night before by men who had been told the plan and had looked at each other and had said nothing. Bika. Use they wanted to see what the end of an age looked like. Down below, in the belly of the keep, the iron ran into molds that had been prepared in secret with the same tenderness that men prepare a cradle. When it cooled, when water had been poured over it with sibilant sighs, when men had prized it out with their hands cleaned for the work, even though that cleanliness did nothing against the black, there were things that had not existed the day before: plowshares, spades, a gate for the night fort, a slender, gleaming ring of iron and weirwood bound that had words carved into its inside curve in two scripts, one crooked as roots, one clean as a river. Between us, a law. Daenerys had the ring brought up to the hall, still steaming where the puddle had been. "This is the only throne that will sit in this room," she said. She set the ring on a table with legs as thick as a man's thigh, where a scribe had been made to sit without wine and with a clean quill. The ring gleamed. "Men will put their hands through it and swear. If the ring burns them, we will write their names in a book so that other men can avoid trusting them with anything sharp. You will have trouble with men who think the taste of blood is the proper reward for the taste of wine," Tyrion said pleasantly. "I will have trouble," Daenerys agreed, not put out by the idea. She had made trouble a companion rather than a stalker. "I will also have a husband with a great many men who like to keep breath in winter. And I will have a chair in Winterfell where I will sit when my husband goes hunting and eats other men's food and smiles at girls in the market until their mothers tell them to look elsewhere. And I will have 3 creatures who do not care whether a man is lord or no when he tastes like meat." Grey Wind thumped his tail once in agreement with the last point. He had never been impressed by titles. The coronations were done in rooms that had not been made for them. Daenerys in the sept with light pouring through the glass not as brilliantly as the singers would later sing. Robb under the heart tree where his crown had never left his head in the minds of the men who had needed to see it every morning to remember they were not alone. They did not make 2 separate realms that hated each other elegantly and in poetry. They made a thing that was more boring and better. A treaty that required the kind of work that does not make a good story until enough time has passed that men forget how long it takes to eat an honest meal. The North was the North, the South was the South, and between them the ring and the bed and the law. Stannis came with the iron from Dragonstone and his justice, and he looked at the melted absence of a throne as a man looks at a neighbor who has cut down a hedge that had been useful to keep cows out. He and Daenerys had a conversation that lasted 6 hours and required 3 scribes to write down the places where they had agreed not to write down that they had disagreed. He would hold the Stormlands where they still remembered his name when they swore their oaths. He would go north when asked until such time as the wall no longer needed him. He would say nothing clever about dragons, and they would say nothing unkind about his god. He left with less than he had hoped and more than he had expected, which is the definition of a bargain that works. Tyrion stayed. He became a hand not in name but in habit, because he put his hand to things that needed doing and did not flinch when they were dirty. He and Wyman made a pair that made clerks stumble in fear and then laugh because they had solved something and had been allowed to admit it. Sansa came out of a small house where she had been sewing to keep from thinking she must die and discovered herself again in the way she moved her lips when she measured the length of a hem and decided to cut it shorter because it would look better and not because a man had told her so. Arya found that her blade had no more names it needed to learn to speak, and that her hands could pick up tasks that were not killing and do them with the same fidelity. Bran came south in a cradle of men's hands one last time, and then went north again with them beneath him and above him and around him. And when he looked at the trees there, they told him things he had not yet been hurt by, and he returned to Winterfell with a crow on his shoulder and a silence around him that was not dangerous. Roose Bolton watched for a season and a half and then made his move because men like him cannot help themselves. He sent his bastard to take a small holdfast near the Weeping Water, because it had a widow in it and men call that a weakness. The widow proved to have a particular dislike for men who took their skins off in their minds before they did it to other things. She opened her gates and her cellars and was nowhere to be found the morning after Ramsay came in. Instead, he found traps that had been laid by men who had made traps for other reasons and had remembered old tricks. He found rooms where the doors did not open outward and windows that were not windows. He found iron that did not mind a man screaming. By the time Roose realized his bastard was making a concerted attempt to die without telling anyone why, the hall had filled with men with honest axes and a woman who had learned to make herself invisible in a way queens cannot and did not much mind it. By the law of the North, Catelyn said, when they stood before the heart tree he had thought too old to interfere. A traitor dies not by an imported sword, but by the hands he hired. Lift your heads. Be counted. They were. Bolton bled, and his blood looked like any other man's. King's Landing learned what it is to be governed by a woman who did not like to be pleased by pretty things. The brothels grew quieter and cleaner, the kitchens louder, the docks busier, the prisons less crowded because men were made to do war. Instead of to sit. The City Watch learned to earn its pay. The Red Keep's Godswood, which had been a joke even to those who had prayed there, grew. Daenerys said she wanted a tree to look at when she missed snow, and men planted one and then a second when the first sulked and then a third when the first finally decided to forgive them. An old man stood there sometimes with his face turned up as if to catch white that was not falling. He said he remembered a time when a dragon had curled around a brazier in a lady's dressing room and had been warm. He was not a liar. He was not entirely right either. Memory does what it needs to. The war did not end in a song and a feast. It ended in the small hard movements of a world that had been taught a better rhythm. Robb rode the borders until men took to saying, in the way they do when they are repeating themselves into comfort, that the king will appear if you leave a gate's hinge ungreased 2 days in a row. He came south when the letters required it. He went north when the wind did. He and Daenerys had fights that were the kind of fights two people have who have both had to lead and have learned to lay that down at the door occasionally like a heavy cloak. They spoke harshly sometimes. They apologized often. They made a habit of finishing their arguments with their hands on the same map they had begun them over, because that reminded them that the world was not made of their disagreement but of roads they had to walk anyway. They had a child. The bells in Daenerys's hair chimed softer that winter, not because she had less to carry but because the weight rode differently on her. The babe had hair like new bark and eyes like meltwater that would become the color of something else when the world decided. They named him Eddard for the debt owed and for the hope that steadiness would one day be a virtue again. They named her Lyanna when the second came, and the wolves would not leave her basket because some memory in their bones thought of a girl who had been a song against her will. There were no prophecies made at the cradle. There were no red women standing with their hands up. There were the normal charms. A ribbon a grandmother had had on her wedding sleeve. A coin a man swore had always brought him luck at dice and any way he needed to get rid of because it made him think he had something to lose. One night, years after the ring had been set on the table and the plowshares made men's backs ache for reasons that were not fear, snow came to King's Landing. It did not fall in insult. It did not make men hungry. It felt like a reminder that the world was still larger than a city and would remain so. Daenerys stood on the balcony with her child on her hip and watched the flakes try to decide whether to melt on her skin or sit like jewels. She laughed when one landed on the baby's nose and the baby blinked it off with the solemn indignation of infants everywhere. Robb came into the room behind her, smelling of leather and cold and something clean that belonged to good horses. He stopped because sometimes you must, and let the sight stand as itself. His wife and his child and the air teaching itself a new trick. Do you ever think of how it might have been if we had said no at the wolf's den? She asked without turning. Yes, he said. "I would be dead. You would be in the south with men plotting at you like rats. The wall would be lower by now by 3 men's heights. My mother would still be angry at me for something I could not fix. Wyman would have got fatter and then died. There are worse worlds. There are better ones. I am content with this one." "Content," she said, and rolled the word in her mouth as if it were a new fruit. "I have been many things. I like this one." He came and put his hands around her from behind, and the child's hand found his thumb and held it with the ferocity of the new. Down in the yard, Gray Wind lifted his head, old now and pleased by warm spots. In the loft above the stables, the dragons slept with the same confidence they had when there had been only 3, and they had perched on a girl's shoulders and thought the world would fit in their mouths when they grew. Far north, where the wall's face had burnished itself with the breath of so many men that it had learned to prefer kindness to malice, an old man sat on a chair and watched the line of the trees and smiled when a flock of birds took off and made their old spiky writing across the sky. Jon Snow stood next to him and thought of the brothers he had buried and the brothers he had not, and was glad that he had never learned to count more quickly. Ghost pressed his head into Jon's hand. A boy with hair like meltwater looked up at them and asked what it was like when the dead had walked, and Jon told him the truth, which is that sometimes being alive is only a matter of wanting it more than the thing that wants to take it away. And after that it is a matter of luck, and after that it is a matter of men like him making it less about luck every day. Later, when the snow had fallen and gone and fallen and gone, and the children had grown and men had found to their surprise that age kept coming even when winter threatened to keep it away forever. When the ring on the table had taken more oaths than it had burned hands. When the plows had turned more earth than the swords had turned men. When singers had finally learned to make a song with fewer lies because there were too many people alive to argue with the old ones. A woman in the Godswood. At Winterfell, red leaves pressed flat between her hands, whispered in delight because she had discovered that the face in the tree looked less sorrowful than it had used to. She called her husband and her child to come see. He nodded and said that perhaps it had always been that way and their eyes had changed. The child put a finger into the red mouth and laughed when the wind touched it, and the sound went up through the branches and along the snow to the wall and over it and out across the cold land that had learned the names of wolves and dragons and had decided it liked them when they were together. It was not a perfect long peace. No such thing exists. Men quarrel about bread and fences and love. There were years of unkind harvests and years when the sea took what it wanted. There were faiths that learned to ignore each other elegantly and faiths that could not be satisfied even with a ring that burned only liars. But the dead did not walk again in numbers that made the living remember they were the same kind. The South did not burn its children for pride. The North did not starve its old to buy tin for glamours. Kings came and went as they had always done, but the law held them by the hand like boys made good by a stern father. Women sat in rooms doing the work that never makes monuments and made a better world like that. On a day in late spring, Robb and Daenerys sat under the not yet ambitious heart tree in the King's Landing garden and ate bread and cheese and drank a wine that did not have to be imported because men had planted vines in hills that had been covered with bodies 3 wars back and had decided that the ground had earned some pleasure. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He traced the thin, pale lines on her wrist that a life in cities had set there long before Winterfell had known her name. "Do you ever miss your throne of swords?" he asked lazily, because it pleased him to remind her that she had chosen to break a thing everyone else had thought must be kept. "No," she said. "Sometimes I miss your father, whom I never knew, because men talk about him in a way that makes me think he would have liked me, and it is not fair that I did not have the chance to prove him wrong." "He would have liked you," Robb said. "He would have been afraid of you. He would have apologized for that later." She smiled. "He is dead," she said, as if that were not the saddest thing in the sentence, which made it less so. "But we have the living." They sat and watched their children attempt to teach a dragon to fetch and fail, and then learned that the game the dragon wanted to play was to make them chase an apple it picked up delicately in its teeth and placed always just out of reach. The wolf slept and did not dream in a way that made him whine. The bells in Daenerys's braid chimed when the wind moved, a sound that had once meant exile and now meant home. The story did not end there. It never does. It did not end in fire or in ice, though it had been tempted by both. It ended, If a story must end when a man or a woman closes a book and sets it back on a shelf, with a beginning that had learned to stay begun. A ring on a table, a bed with 2 heads and 1 law, a gate in a wall forged from old weapons, the knowledge written in the faces of men that they had been spared the worst not by luck alone but by people who had thought and fought and kept their promises when there was no one watching to be impressed. And if, now and then, in the hour before dawn when the city was tired of its own noise and had laid it aside for a while, a girl with hair like silver gray walked out onto a balcony and looked toward the north and listened, and if a boy with hair like bracken turned over in a bed in Winterfell and felt the same listening in his bones, and if in the space between their breaths they thought of a godswood and a quail and bread broken with salt and a scale the color of burnt night, there was no harm in that. Some beginnings deserve remembering even after they have done their work, and some endings are only that. A promise kept so well it learned how to live on its own, under snow that did not burn and fire that did not freeze.